Yay!
Recording on.
Oh my God, I can see it. It says rec.
Ooh. And here are some people.
Ooh.
I'm welcoming the new guests, welcoming all the guests to the room. I'd like to just start by letting you know that your microphone is off, so we won't be able to hear you, but we can see you. You can either have us as a speaker view or a gallery view if you're new to this platform. So if you want to see us all like Brady Bunch people, you can go on gallery view. Otherwise, you can actually have us on speaker view where you can only see the person who is speaking one at a time.
Ooh, what happened?
I don't know, but interesting. So you're all on mute. Just welcome to the room, people who have arrived. We're going to wait a couple more minutes for other people to come through. Your microphones are on mute. There is a chat function on the, if you're on a screen, on the bottom of your screen, there is a chat function. And when you click that, you can type a message. The message comes to me. I am the administrator tonight. So I'm the person who gets the messages, and I will field questions at the end of the event tonight. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them at any time during the event, because I have my pencil handy and I will be writing down your questions ready to ask afterwards. So hi, we've already got a few people trying out chat, saying hi.
Welcome everyone. Start thinking about your questions, because we're not scary. So we're very inviting people, right, Shannon?
Speak for yourself.
And this will be the vibe of the evening.
It's a Friday after all.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I don't know actually. What day?
Well, it is a day.
It
is a day.
Yeah. Marchuary.
Yeah. I believe it might be spring.
Yeah.
Possibly winter. And it's it's tough out there, everyone. So thanks for coming along.
Indoors. Outdoors.
So for people who have just arrived, your microphones are on mute. Chat function is on the bottom of your screen. If you want to think of some questions for the end of the event, feel free to send them through at any time, and I will get them and savor them up for the end. So I think we'll just go one more minute while we wait for the last few participants who are just arriving now. I'm just admitting some more people to the room. So we'll just wait a couple more minutes, and then we will get this show started. Actually, I'm getting someone else. You're going to see me looking, clicking, and trying to do the introductions at the same time. So I apologise in advance.
You're hacking into a defence.
Yes, it looks like you're going to space.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like, it's got to start shaking soon. Shake the camera, make it more dramatic.
Okay, I'm going to start the introductions, and I will try and let people in as they arrive as well. Multitasking, my goodness. Oof. Who thought it would be this frantic in the apocalypse? That's what I want to know. Anyway, I'd like to welcome everybody to this Avid Reader event. It's really fantastic that we could actually put most of our program online. So almost every event that we've had that had to be cancelled has actually dropped into an online format. So that's really fantastic. It's amazing that we've been able to salvage a little bit of the goodwill that was there for books and bookshops before the apocalypse. I've got to stop calling. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and that is going to be different in different areas. But in my area, it's the Yagara and the Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any other elders who are here tonight, and also to all of the elders of the peoples of the lands on which you're meeting, which will be many and varied, I suspect. We even had someone from Sweden who was not on Aboriginal land at all yesterday. So welcome to everybody. The format of tonight is that you guys are going to have, there'll be a chat between Rick and Shannon, and then at the end there'll be questions and time for you to ask them. So it's my job tonight just to admit the new people and to welcome our two guests tonight. Rick Morton is an award-winning journalist and author of the book 100 Years of Dirt, which is absolutely fantastic. And Shannon Molloy, who is an award-winning journalist with more than a decade of experience working for major media outlets spanning print and digital, covering business, entertainment, celebrity, and human interest. And we are here to celebrate his book, 14, which is also a fantastic read. So welcome to Rick and Shannon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. It was beautiful. And yeah, I just wanted to quickly say I'm on the land of the Gadigal people in the Eora Nation. So thank you to their elders, past and present as well. And I think, Shannon, you're the same.
I am.
Yeah. I wanted to, just before we begin like properly and in earnest, I did want to say, like, I read your book in its manuscript form just before it went to the printers. And it was this kind of beautiful ode to a sunny but also dark place. And I found, as much as your personal story was so haunting in some parts of it, it was so kind of sun-drenched and hopeful at the same time. And I think it's, the thing that really animated me when I was reading it was about the descriptions of place, but also time. Like, I think particularly for people of our age, when we grew up in that era, and it was a weird era, I think.
It was in between cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the late 90s, early 2000s. It was sort of, yeah.
It was in the grey area.
Yeah.
But you're kind of, the way you evoke nostalgia, and you're not doing it deliberately, but you're talking about the music and the pop culture and the clothes that people were wearing. It is just an astonishingly good book with all of that stuff. So I really commend it to people before we get going.
Thank you.
I guess I'm going to start with the broad question to start off with. This book takes place in Yeppoon. You've come quite a long way from Yeppoon to where you are now.
A little way.
In both time and space.
Yes.
I feel.
Yes.
How has your life changed? Just in a very broad overview before we begin. How's your life changed in the last couple of decades?
In so many ways. I'm working in the job that I always wanted to work in from the time I can remember, really, from sort of 5 years of age. I'm living my dream professionally. I'm happy personally. I'm married and live in a nice house with a cat and a dog.
Disgusting.
Sorry. And I'm comfortable. I don't sort of walk down the street fearful for myself. I can be myself at work or out and about. And those three things are things that I never imagined for myself at the age that I write this that I capture in this book. I didn't think that I'd ever be able to work a job without hiding myself. I didn't think that I'd ever find love, and I certainly didn't think that I'd be able to walk down the street safely. So
I do.
Change.
Yeah, and I do wonder what you would say to like 14-year-old Shannon if you got to travel back in time now and be like, "Oi, idiot."
Yeah. Stop straightening your hair into this weird sort of Carol Brady fringe. Does not look good. Ease up on the peroxide and moisturise daily. No, I would say I guess I would definitely say that things get better, which is kind of a cliche. It's been robbed almost by commercial brands and marketing campaigns in the past couple of years, but it holds true that things get better. Today's terrible day is tomorrow's lesson or tomorrow's cathartic moment, and I hope that that's what this book conveys. That the worst of the worst can last for a day or a week or a month or a year in this case, but it's temporary, and reflecting on that now, I feel it more than ever. So maybe that's what I would tell him, but not too much, because a lot of the journey kind of made me who I am today, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I wouldn't want to spoil any of that.
Yeah, it's almost like putting a cheat code into a gaming system, I think.
Yeah.
So the book is 14. It takes place in your 14th year, in the year 2000 from memory.
That's right.
Yeah, what a year. Can you take us, I want you to read, I think you've got a section from the start of the book, just
Okay.
you're in Yeppoon in do we classify it as North Queensland or far North Queensland?
Central Queensland.
Okay, yeah, still central.
But on the coast. So I grew up on the Capricorn coast, as they call it. So I'll read you a little bit about my hometown. So for the many who have not heard of it, and that's most people, Yeppoon is a small regional town on the central Queensland coast, smack bang on the Tropic of Capricorn. It's a 40-minute drive east from Rockhampton, the area's big smoke, better known as the beef capital of Australia. Rocky had 2 decently sized shopping centres and a McDonald's, so a trip there was met with huge anticipation. New clothes and a quarter pounder. What more could you want? Growing up in Yeppoon, by far the most popular activity for adolescents was gathering around the 3 grey steel tables at the back of Keppel Bay Plaza. They were horribly uncomfortable and always cold, even in the dead of summer, but they were located just outside an entrance that was not often used and shielded from the car park by a wall of lattice, so it gave us privacy to smoke and talk shit without adults catching us. The small shopping centre boasted around 15 stores, a clothes shop for older ladies, the post office, a place to get your keys cut, a cafe that did amazing seasoned hot chips served with a side of sour cream, a buy-low supermarket, and a hippie shop that stunk of cheap incense and sold crystals, dream catchers, and books about witchcraft. The shopping centre was at one end of James Street, the main drag, which ran for 3 blocks down to the beachfront. Dotted along the way were a movie theatre, which always got new releases about 2 or 3 months after everywhere else in Australia, an ice cream parlour with a claim to fame of serving 30 scoops of ice cream in an actual kitchen sink basin, a novelty they creatively called the kitchen sink. Another family-owned supermarket that had a frozen Coke machine, our favourite place to go on a hot summer's day, and a surfwear shop that none of us could afford to buy so much as a pair of thongs from. For me, arguably the best metaphor for Yeppoon was the annual coral spawn. Just as summer was about to begin, the reef off the coast to the north would secrete huge plumes of stinking foam, which would gently float across the waves and onto the shore. You couldn't swim for fear of being covered in gunk. The main street stank of rotting fish. It was disgusting. If it was particularly windy during the spawn, the fluffy mess would whip up onto the grass and blow over the road just in front of the fish and chip shop. For weeks, we would be blanketed with the odour of rotting reef reproduction byproduct. Those few weeks aside, Yeppoon was a pretty town on the surface. If you received a postcard from someone who had been there, you might be tempted to pay a visit for yourself. It had a quintessentially sleepy vibe. Old people liked to retire there. Young parents assumed it was a good place to raise their kids. It was a sort of spot that would have been nice to stop in for 3, maybe 4 days tops. I was a pastime for all those bored kids in Yeppoon. I became there's something to do, something to stare at, to whisper about, to gossip over, and shit was there some gossip. There were always added embellishments as the rumours about me were passed from person to person, some of them admirably creative, others downright absurd. I used to lament to my friends that if I was to fart at one end of town, by the time I reached the other on foot, the story would have spread into how I had shit my pants. Shannon Molloy was a name everybody knew, regardless of which school they went to, what grade they were in, and whether we'd even met. I was a bit like a novelty. I was there to taunt, to abuse, to bash, to force out of any social circle that existed, to isolate from the peer group to being different. The first time I saw someone else's view of me, a disgusting, weak, pathetic deviant, one so contrary to how I viewed myself, it was soul-destroying. Even worse was when, after hearing the voices enough, I started to believe them for myself. So that's a little snapshot of Yeppoon and my place in it.
I want to give you a big hug through the screen.
This is the only socially distanced appropriate way of touching.
Yes,
so
yes, of course. No touching, no touching. It is, I mean, because you know this already because we are friends in real life, but like, you know, I grew up in a regional Queensland town eventually as well after leaving a more regional area, which had nothing. And things change, and it's certainly not true of everyone in every town, but there is a real need, I think, in regional Australia for people to fit in, more so than in the cities where you can find, you know, that kind of let your freak flag fly thing. And I think, you know, that's what was so pervasive in this book, is that you were different, and people were afraid of different.
Yeah. And it wasn't, it's sort of, I touch on it a little bit in the book, this notion of homophobia, and I never really understood what that word meant in my context, because it's, you know, if you're afraid of something, you kind of avoid it, right? Like if you're afraid of spiders or, I don't know, red cars.
Yeah, I don't yell at spiders from my car.
Yeah. You don't go looking for spiders to sort of poke and prod and whatever. So my experience of being different was, I think they were obviously fearful of that difference and how it kind of infiltrated their lives, but they also sought it out and had more of a hatred of it. And so it was dangerous to be different. And it wasn't just for me, it was for, you know, there was one Chinese family, and they owned the Chinese shop, of course, it was regional Queensland. And they were taunted mercilessly. There was a disabled girl who was, you know, her life was hell. People were horrible to her. So any form of difference was a risk.
And it strikes me because, I mean, it's not just amongst your peers. I mean, this is a system that is enforced by adults as well, including at your school, at your high school, which is just the most head-shakingly horrific stuff to read about, because these people they're meant to know better.
Yeah.
And
my mum read the manuscript, and the first thing she said was how upsetting it was and whatever. The second thing was, why didn't you tell me? We could have sued and made all this money. because the teachers were complicit in a lot of what I experienced. And I still don't know, even after revisiting that period so extensively for the book, I still don't know if it was because they wanted to be complicit, or like in a sort of malicious sense, or whether they were just kind of useless. And
I suspect the latter.
Yeah, I want to think that too.
I mean, yeah, that's, you know, my nature is to always err on that stuff. But, you know, sometimes people just don't know enough to be better.
Yeah.
Not always. You can kind of tell when they've got that malicious intent, and sometimes they're just daft.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it hurts any less.
No, but at the time, it's, you know, the story of the teacher who read out the really graphic note about another boy in the middle of class, and that sort of prompted, you know, this.
Just to set it up, you had allegedly written this note, but you didn't.
It was a note from me professing my deepest, strangest sexual desires, apparently, that someone wrote, and the teacher read it out in the middle of class. And at the time, I felt like that was my fault, because the way I acted, or the way I was inherently, much as I tried not to be, sort of put me in that position. Whereas now, with the benefit of hindsight and sort of an adult common sense, I look at that and I'm horrified. And I think, like, how could someone who is trained to be kind of the nourisher of future minds and hearts and future members of the community be so awful, and just so stupid as well? Like, what instinct in a teacher thinks that that's okay to read out something like that? But at the time, it just sort of felt like that's how life was, and I should just cop it or not, as the story goes in chapter 6.
I mean, the coral spawn that you read out earlier is such a vibrant metaphor for this town, because really it's about this whole time for teenagers in particular is this failure to multiply. You know, they're all trying and grabbing at each other, and everyone's confused. Certainly that was me last week in my 20s, in my 30s. You know, some people don't grow out of it, is what I'm saying. But in that time, you know, and sexuality does play such a big role in all of this. And some kids have it figured out and some don't. And if you don't figure it out, Lord help you. It certainly seemed to be the case for you, I think. Yeah,
and I didn't really know much. It was the concepts I knew about homosexuality were painted in some very narrow contexts. And the main one was the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. I sort of grew up seeing that on the news, and that was the first time that I'd heard about homosexuals. And a lot of the conversations in the playground were like, "Oh, you've got AIDS," and like that was that was sort of my introduction to what gay people were. And the second was this really negative tone about gay people, whether it be at, I don't know, some random family friend's barbecue and Roger, the, you know, coal dust covered old bloke in the corner on the barbecue calling everyone a poofter or a faggot, like that. There was never any positive mention of homosexuals. And so I didn't really understand what it was, but I knew from a very young age that it was a terrible, bad thing, and that I should hope against hope that I don't end up like that.
And in some cases it seems, and I don't know the full story behind this or what happened to these people, but in some cases it seems like the people who were your antagonists or who did you harm were themselves trying to deal with like questions or unresolved questions about their sexuality.
Yeah, like weirdly common.
Yeah, I mean that's.
There's one character who, you know, is straight but very clearly not. There's another. I haven't included him in the book just because he gets enough attention. But one of my another bully who ended up being a football player and then a male model, many years later came out as gay, and he was awful to me at school. And I remember he sort of said one day, like, "Oh, well, you know, it's now you get why." And I was like, I guess kind of. And he said, you know, well, you know, if your experience was bad, imagine how much worse mine was, because I was trying to hide who I was by being awful to you. It's like, oh, sympathy.
It is kind of like a Charles Darwinistic kind of race to survive.
Yeah.
And some of the adaptations are not beautiful.
No. And some you hope sort of whittle their way out of existence. But
yes, the day off.
Some don't, you know, like weirdly confused teenage boys in a hyper-masculine setting with not a great deal of guidance or sort of rules or structure. Like it's gay, not sporty, red-headed, whatever. Like add any difference to that environment, that's a recipe for disaster.
I mean, because that's kind of what, you know, I always kind of talk about the fact that homophobia can be just as bad for straight men, because it's a way of policing how you walk, how you hug your friends or touch them affectionately, to the point where you can only slap them on the bum playing football. And never the twain shall meet otherwise. But, you know, that is such a pervasive, this idea that men can only be one way ruins so much about the people around you.
I remember reading a story, it was sort of in my late teens, about these two guys. They were in a park in Brisbane in the middle of the day, and one had his marriage had just broken down, and the other was his, you know, best mate from school. They were in their late 20s, and they were hugging because his mate was crying about his marriage breakdown, and someone bashed them for being like,
oh my God.
I remember reading the news coverage of this bizarre, like, gay hate bashing in Brisbane on a Tuesday morning and thinking, wow, like, they're not even gay, but they're copping it. And so you can't even be vulnerable or needy or, you know, emotional. Like, that's kind of, that was the world that I lived in.
And so much of I mean, what I really love about this book, and I think it's because I'm biased because I love mums, but your mum, Donna, is such a hero of this book, and as are your siblings. Like the amount of times I punched the air with joy that you had these fierce protectors around you. I mean, but that was a tough situation for everyone involved, because, you know, Donna was doing this work almost always on her own, and trying to raise you and these other kind of headstrong siblings. But what a beautiful portrait of them that you paint.
Yeah. I do not envy the task that she had throughout her whole adult life trying to wrangle the four of us. We were like feral assholes. We were all very individualistic, very demanding. And then there's me, like, in the mix, this sort of, you know, sickly, you know, the rumpus, the litter, like, oh, everyone's being mean to me. And it's like, Jesus Christ. I'm tired. But no, Mum is my hero and my best friend, and is the hero of this book. She would, despite being busy and trying to just keep the wheels on this very ramshackle wagon, she would drop anything at a moment's notice for me, and still does to this day. Like, she would You know, I coughed on the phone the other week because I started smoking again and haven't told her. Oh my God, you've got corona. I'm getting in the car. I'm driving down to Sydney. I'm going to look after you. And so she's still very protective.
God bless her.
Yeah, I feel like, Mum, you can have her if you like.
Yeah.
Very overbearing. But no, she was, Mum and my siblings are the reason that I got through that year unscathed, as well as my sort of small group of friends. And that's another thing that I hope comes across in the book, is the power of kindness. You know, these individual sort of moments might not seem like much when you're doing them, but, you know, they have the power to save someone's life, to give them the hope and courage to carry on. And that was certainly my experience. It was, you know, Mum storming into the school. It was her, you know, this really awkward conversation in the car one day about how I should never give up, all set to the soundtrack of S Club 7, Bring It All Back. Like, you know, my favourite part.
There's a mother that knows how to get through to her child.
Oh, look, she knew her audience and how to get the message. But yeah, she's the hero of this book, I hope. And this is
and you know, your siblings, you know, was it your sister who drove you around town looking for one of the bullies, or was that your brother?
Damien. Yeah.
I mean, so and he's like he's a man's man, to use a stereotype.
Yeah, he's enormous.
Yeah.
He's tall and wide.
And nothing wrong with that. I am also a square. So.
No, this is another sort of random bashing story in the book. Another really feel-good tale. And my eldest brother, you know, coming back from the pub at his wife's insistence and driving me around town for hours looking for the kid that had done it. And God knows what he would have done. But
yeah.
I
mean, without endorsing the outcome, but, you know, the protective instinct he had was so fierce.
Yeah, and beautiful. Like at the time, it sort of scared me. I was like, no, you'll just make it worse. But in hindsight, it's that act of kindness and wanting to protect me and wanting the best for me. And
and in terms of male role models, or at least people that we can look back on now, there was another kind of white knight, for want of putting it a better way. Andy,
yes.
Tell us about Andy, because Andy, I know from personal experience, having met him, is a beautiful human being.
He was just this sort of, like, if you were writing a character in a really cliched American high school rom-com, you would write Andy. Like, popular, kind, cool, but not an asshole, like sporty, but also was in the school musical. He was just, I don't know, it was kind of envious to watch him like just sail by seemingly, you know, unscathed. But he was like the king of that school, and he was probably the only kid that was nice to me. And he would, you know, stick up for me if he walked by as someone was shoving me into a, you know, bin or whatever. He would sort of, if talk turned to me and the cool group, he would tell them to knock it off or whatever. He was wonderful, and it was his sort of fateful intervention on this day where I was going to take my own life. Just this sort of perfectly timed phone call after hearing about something horrific that had happened. And so Andy was my white knight, and at the moment that I needed it the most. And again, this sort of, here was this cool kid that took 7 minutes out of his day to make a phone call after hearing something terrible had happened to me, and it literally saved my life. And so again, it just comes back to the whole point of, you know, one small act, or one seemingly small act, can have a profound impact.
It's having heard of all this stuff, and, you know, like knowing what you went through, living in regional Queensland, central Queensland, not having tremendous access to the world, you then decide to go into this very forward-facing, or try to get into this very forward-facing kind of larger-than-life career, which is journalism. Like, you've got to be front and centre. How the fuck do you make the pivot from being crushed as a 14-year-old to being out there?
Well, I never I never really wanted to be forward-facing, and my experience of journalism was that there was the person's name on the front page next to the story, and you never knew what they looked like. You never heard from them, and that form of journalism still appeals to me significantly.
That used to be true.
Well, I know those days are over, but I don't know if those people got many death threats, and that's quite appealing to me, having written about sort of social issues quite a bit. But no, I always wanted to write. I always wanted to be in the news. My mum bought me a clunky old black and red typewriter when I was 5. And it's my favourite thing ever. And I used to write short stories, and then I graduated to writing this kind of neighbourhood newsletter on it called the Arthur Street Chronicle.
To this day, the nerdiest thing you've ever done.
100%. Just picture me at 6, like typing away and then putting it in people's mailboxes and interviewing the butcher about why ham was so expensive at Christmas.
And thumbing your press tag going, we've got to hit every publisher in town.
Absolutely. And that's a small but very clear insight into the sort of kid I was. But so, yeah, there was never any doubt. And then I went to uni and studied, and then got a job straight away. And for a long time, I wasn't forward-facing. No one knew who I was. God, I miss that. Now anyone can email me any time of day.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, they do. I mean, I do want to kind of I think people get. I mean, and in many ways, the struggle for justice has moved on to other very worthy areas that need airtime and attention, like trans rights, for example.
Absolutely.
But I think the story of any minority anywhere, if it doesn't get, if we haven't reached full kind of equality in terms of even homophobia, what chance anything else, right? And I feel like people think that we solved that, but we didn't.
Well, that's my great fear, and it's not necessarily the motive why I wrote this book, but I'm a big believer in that if you forget history, you're bound to repeat it. But we have marriage equality now, and it's great, and I've personally benefited from it, and it's brought so much joy to my life. But there are still, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something astonishing, like 89 pieces of legislation in New South Wales alone that exclude gay people, just based on no one's bothered to want to change them. It was only in 1997 that homosexuality was decriminalised in Tasmania. This book was 20 years ago. Like we are within reaching distance of some really horrible parts of history, and we still have a long way to go. Gay and lesbian and bi kids are 6 times more likely to attempt suicide now than their contemporary counterparts. For trans kids, as you've sort of touched on, it's double that number. We're not done. There are so many parts in which we're lacking. And my experience is historic in the sense that I've written about a time 20 years ago, but I don't think it's fixed. I'm sure that there are kids right now living a similar experience, hopefully marginally improved for the sake of, God, but right now in regional Queensland or suburban Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne, we're not there.
Yeah, there's a lot that needs to change. I am conscious of the time, but I do want to quickly, you are a senior journalist at news.com.au, which is, for the last few years, has been the number 1 read website in the country. Journalism, I feel like, is changing so much, and journalists love talking about journalists, and I hate being that guy. But I do feel like we are in a moment, right, where people are fracturing all around the world. We had the rise of kind of neo-fascism in the last few years up until the pandemic hit, and now we've been briefly distracted. But people don't trust journalists like they used to, no matter where they are. Like there is this kind of vanguard movement of people who are doing their own digging and their own questions and whatnot. So our job feels harder and also yet more important than ever before. And I don't know what the future looks like for traditional mainstream news journalists.
Yeah.
Do you?
No. I wish I did. No. And
that filled me with confidence
about this. It was barely 5 weeks ago that I wrote a story about how serious the coronavirus was based on these discussions with about 3 different epidemiologists, and why the elderly need to sort of almost be locked in their houses because they keep going out and they're vulnerable and whatever. And I've got all these abusive emails about how I was upsetting old people and why don't I focus on the positives of the coronavirus. And it's like, house prices? I don't know. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, it's a real investor's market out there, you know?
It is. Well, we'll be soon. But it's this innate distrust that, everyone I spoke to was saying, please reinforce how important and how urgent this is. But then when I do so, people sort of just assume that it's a beat up or a, sensationalist headline or something. And so that's a real problem, particularly when beating this virus and dealing with this crisis counts on people listening to the advice that they're getting. So I am very fearful. I don't have the answer.
Man,
if I did,
this would be a very valuable Zoom meeting if you did.
Wouldn't it just? But no, just on a brief note, I love my job because I get to tell people stories, whether it's in a sort of daily news capacity, and that story could be a epidemiologist talking about why this keeps them up at night, or an old person who is now lonely, but someone set up this movement to send them pictures of their kids' drawings and it's made their day. Like, that's the beauty of my job, is that I get to tell people stories. And now I'm sort of pivoting and telling my own very briefly. So it's a huge privilege.
I think you should do a sequel called 30. Because I know for a fact that some funny stuff happened in that year. Sorry, I'm not going to give it all away, because that would be bad of me.
Printed for legal reasons.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you do have some of the best stories going around just from your days as a entertainment journalist. I know you can't tell them here, but be honest, the other part of the job is also just learning to know stuff. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. The reason why I hate Jane Fonda.
Call me after this.
Can I jump in here with some questions for you?
Please do.
Okay. All right. So we have a question from Caitlin, who has asked, what was the most challenging thing about writing this book, and has it actually changed you as a person?
Going back to those really sort of brutal, raw moments of the physical torment was quite challenging. There were a number of times where I had to just put it down, even though I was on a roll and sort of it's flowing out. It's, it was so horrific that I had to close the laptop and go for a long walk around the block. And the thing that made writing this really challenging is that I kept working during it. I didn't take any time off because I had no leave. I'd used it all on a really epic holiday. So, as you do. And so it was kind of challenging to, get up at 6, as I used to, write for an hour about something really heavy and horrific, and then just pop to work for a cheeky 10 hours. And so that was really hard, was going back to these things that I had never spoken about, really. My husband, who is probably the person closest to me outside of my family, knew bits and pieces, but not intimate details. Rick, who's one of my best mates, would read things and be like, holy shit, you never said anything about that. And so this was lifting the lid on a little box of trauma that had been hidden away for essentially 20 years. And so that was really challenging. But then, just as I thought that I had gone through this really beautiful process of, putting it to bed, then I went and did the audiobook of it and had to read it out loud. And so that was quite a challenge in itself. But at the end of all of those processes, it felt like that I had, exercised the demons, so to speak. And I'm a better person for it, hopefully.
We've got another question here from Zach, which was, why did you restrict your narrative to just one single year?
I think because it was sort of the worst year by far, and so it was kind of good to just get the start of that terrible year and the end of that terrible year, because at the end of that year, no spoilers, but something really amazing happens, and that sort of changes the course of my life and how I view life. But then also to sort of not include the first year of high school. The first year was not amazing, but it was okay. It was like sort of baby animals trying to find their feet, and then they learn how to run and also kick the shit out of you, and that's what happened in the second year of school. And so it was the year that defined the most challenge that I've ever experienced, and it felt right to just it was shit from January to December, so it felt good to bookend it.
Exercise those demons. So Galaxy S8, I'm sure that's not their name. Do you still have contact with the girls who were your best friends in school?
I do. So Morgan, who is probably my closest friend in the book, we're still close, we talk online all the time. Nicole, who's my other friend in the book, I know that she's in Melbourne and has a family and very happy. I have lost touch with Jess, who was the sort of the fun party girlfriend, which is a shame, but I can't find her, not on Facebook, or has married and has a different name. And then, as Rick alluded to, Andy, who's the sort of hero in chapter 6, is one of my closest friends now. Lives overseas, but we talk all the time, usually with a few drinks under the belt, and late at night, which is perfect.
I've got another question from Kylie, who says, firstly, congratulations on a wonderful book. And I'd like to know if there's anything you had to edit out of the book, anything that you took out that you wish was still in there, perhaps. That's the first part of the question. So that's
whatever the lawyers told me to. No, most of it's there. There were some things that we sort of muted a little bit just because they were too heavy, and the last thing I wanted to do was write a book that people read and they're miserable at the end of it. I wanted there to be some sort of semblance of hope, of a message, like I've sort of rambled on about the power of kindness. So there were a couple of things that we pulled back just slightly, but for the most part, it's as it happened. Names were changed for various reasons. Lots of physical sort of attributes were changed. But yeah, just whatever the lawyers told me to do.
And she also, maybe it's a different person. And Carly says it's full of hope and strength and such a great piece of work. So there you go.
Thank you.
Christy has asked, how did people pick you out as different? What do you think was the reason that they were different?
Look at me and imagine this with, overly gelled hair and about 20 kilos lighter. No, I was, the school I went to was very sporty and placed a huge premium on sort of athleticism, and I was, I think, probably about 39 kilos and dangerously uncoordinated. I liked reading and writing and theatre and painting the props for the musical and that sort of stuff more than, I used to go and hide in the bush during the sports carnival. I did not fit in any possible way, and that's very noticeable. But also, I was quite effeminate, and there's a whole sort of chunk of the book of me trying to fix that, so to speak, after I became aware of it. But it's it's like sharks smelling a drip of blood a kilometre away. They see difference and they go for it. That's what kids are like. But in that sort of, in that powder keg of a school, and and that time in history, I was like a sort of leader of blood.
Now, we have someone who says that they were the deputy at the school then. And
oh, wow.
Your mum was their hairdresser.
Yes.
And it's Pa and KP. I don't know which part of the Pa and KP is the deputy.
It's the K. Hello.
And did anyone make a difference to you, the K?
Yes. Well, obviously, Kay did. Kay was the deputy principal and went to have her hair done at Mum's salon, and took a keen interest in sort of making sure that I felt like I could reach out. Part of the problem was that I didn't. I would sort of, there's a whole bit in the book where I lie about this, guy that tried to sort of do things to me, and I ran through the bush and just pretended that I didn't know who he was, but I knew who he was all the time. So it was kind of a tough task, really. But yeah, there was I don't know if I should use your full name or not. But the deputy principal, who was wonderful and tried her best to make me feel comfortable in a lion's den. But also there was an art teacher who was just lovely. She was, I think, on her first teaching placement and was very, would let me help out on the school musical, painting the props, and also had her hair done at Mum's salon, and was lovely. So yeah, there were a couple.
Right. And there's a question here from Zach. What's your poon like these days?
I have no idea. I have not been back in a very long time. I know that they have like a new foreshore, and there's a McDonald's now, and a new shopping centre. That's probably the extent of my knowledge. No, I haven't been back in, it'd have to be about 8 years now. I have a couple of school friends that I stay in touch with from primary school, and one of them sends her kids to the high school that I went to, and she assures me that it's changed, that kids are a little bit more progressive, or that's probably not the right word, less violent, I don't know.
Relaxed.
Marginally less murderous. No, the school is different, and that makes me happy. The town has grown. I think when I grew up there were maybe 15,000 people at most. I think it's about double that now. So it's much bigger. It's much more sort of happening, and there's more diversity. So I hope I still can't quite bring myself to go back though.
I went to school in Gladstone, so I kind of know the area. Yes, I think it's very familiar. I think that we've had all the questions now, and I think that it might be time to call an end to our evening. But before I do, firstly, I'd like to thank both you and Rick for the conversation. It's been really fantastic, and I know that Avid Reader has a queer book club, and I know that they're really excited about your book and that they will be looking at it. So that's really
thank you.
And so for everyone in the audience, I'm posting a link to the book, being a big bookseller here. So that's a link if anybody wants to, free postage for orders over $50 up till Sunday. And feel free to just order some books there. And I'm going to unmute everybody in a minute. So if you wanted to say any last goodbyes before it becomes a cacophony and everyone can just wave and say hello very loudly, or talk on their phone and not know that we're here. So did you want to say anything before I make the world into a cacophony?
Just thank you to you guys. Obviously, this was meant to be my first event at a bookshop. Obviously, it's not happening in person because of the coronavirus crisis, but I'm very grateful for your support. Thanks to everyone for coming. This book is a sort of, it's a piece of me, and I'm grateful that people are interested in reading it, and hopefully you enjoy it. So thanks so much for giving up a bit of your Friday night. And thanks to Rick, of course, for not just being a great moderator and conversation partner, but an incredible friend as well.
Shush. Thanks everyone for coming. That was so much fun.
And here.
Shannon, it's Kay, also known as Mrs. Tute.
Hi, Mrs.
How are you,
Tute.
darling?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I got this on the feed, and I thought I cannot not see this. I'm so glad you've done so well. And I was just thinking about, I still have on my bookcase when I left St Brendan's in 2001 a little doll that you gave me. But anyway, I'll show that to everybody because it's probably too sooky for anybody. But take care, darling.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Much love.
Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
Thank you.
And now we can applaud.
Yeah.
Shannon. That's my boy. By 14, you'll devour it.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome. Avid reader event.
See you at the next book launch.